Welcome to episode 205 of Silver Lining for Learning. It's August 31st, 2024. I'm with my co-host, Punya Mishra from Arizona State University, Lydia Cao from the University of Toronto, Yang Zhao, who's back from China, and he's with us here in the US and probably sitting in Oregon somewhere, but he's a professor at the University of Kansas and the University of Melbourne. Chris Dede from Harvard University rounds us off. Today we have a guest who's an alum of Indiana University PhD program in Instructional Systems Technology, also with an MBA from Indiana University, Dr. Shameem Farouk, who's at Maybank in Malaysia. And we've been talking about this episode for probably close to a year now. Unfortunately, her colleague is in the West Coast somewhere with intermittent internet access, so we will not hear from Philip Parker today, but maybe we will in the future. So Shameem, can you kind of set the stage for us of what's happening at Maybank? That the title of this episode, by the way, is Democratizing and Accelerating AI, Artificial Intelligence, Upskilling for Workforce Digital Inclusion. So tell us what's going on in terms of digital inclusion at Maybank and at other places maybe you're working with around the world. What's been happening, what's planned to be happening in the near future, what your involvement is in all of that. Give us a little short, and if you want to show us a couple of quick things that maybe you have some data. I think you have some wonderful data. You could pop that in, and we'll ask you some questions, Shameem. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Thanks very much, Kurt, and everyone here today. I mean, it's an honor and privilege because each one of you are experts in the field. And for me, it's going to be I hope this will be an interesting conversation for both of us, for all of you here today. But what I thought, therefore, is to just perhaps use Maybank as a case study, from my perspective. It might not be generalizable across, but it's just an example of how we did it. So backdrop, I think Maybank is a financial institution. We call it a universal bank. It has, we provide insurance, investment banking, retail banking for consumers, corporate banking, and so forth. Now we've got 44,000 employees, and out of these employees, I would say only about 2,000, we have just 2,000 managers. And then we have a lot of employees sort of at the bottom of the pyramid who work in the branches. So because we are the largest retail bank in Malaysia, so we have about 300 branches across Malaysia, and we also have a regional footprint in Southeast Asia. So covering all 10 countries in Southeast Asia, in fact, covering Philippines, Cambodia. In fact, those are also very large footprint for our retail banking, consumer banking. And so, and we also operate in, more remote, smaller countries and remote locations in those countries. And so we have a very diverse workforce, spread geographically across. Things are managed centrally, policies are managed centrally within Malaysia, and then it permeates across the different countries. And then we've got, back in 2018, a very interesting challenge. And the challenge was that because we are in Southeast Asia, so we're very close in proximity to China. Now, when you take a look at what's happening in China in the financial service area, with the huge focus of the country in terms of creating greater financial inclusion, in China, it has actually inspired a lot of new technology companies, including in finance, right? So the famous financial services company Ant Financial, which is an Alibaba Group company, started expanding not just within China, but globally. And and they expanded into Southeast Asia, specifically into Malaysia as well. So this started happening in 2016, 2017. Now, what that means is that banking has, and financial's way of banking is very different because it does not utilize branches. It is purely a digital bank. If you go to the grocery store, in 2017 in Malaysia, we started seeing this thing called the QR code, where people could pay by just scanning the QR code, and then it would link into their bank account, or we call it a wallet. And from the wallet, digitally, people could make payments to the merchant. So all this was bypassing our traditional banking, process, because you wouldn't need to actually pay with a credit card. You do not need to pay with cash. So now, what happened was that Ant Financial was quickly able to scale their operations within 6 months to most merchants in Malaysia. So if you went to the mall, you went to 7-Eleven, you went to any grocery store, you would see Ant Financial payment mechanism there, the QR code. Now, this is a threat, literally a threat for many banks, including Maybank, because number one, we lose revenues, literally. Now, I'm going to make it a bit more commercial because this is what's at the top of the mind of our shareholders and our, management. When anything that touches upon revenues and which, reduces our revenue line, that's serious, right? And so this particular product, digital financial product, which Alibaba was bringing into the country, was literally, right, reducing fees for many banks in Malaysia, including Maybank. Now, then this actually raised a lot of interest among our senior management. Hey, what are they doing? What's their business model behind this, right? And how are they able to scale very quickly? Meaning to say they're able to be present across Malaysia, across different countries in Southeast Asia. And lo and behold, what is really fundamentally fueling that is actually the digital platform and the artificial intelligence algorithms, modeling, right? That's behind that. And guess what? I mean, Ant Financial is powered by not bankers, but by, programmers, by, AI financial modelers and things like that, right? So the whole makeup of our financial technology companies, the fintechs we call it, the digital banking companies, are very different than traditional banking. And so that created the sort of one sense of urgency too, because it was creating a lack of revenue for the bank. We are losing money. And number two, that the speed and scale in which things are happening is just amazing. So that's, I would say, the backdrop of what had happened, right? That created the need for why digital and trying to upskill and reskill our workforce is important for us. Does that, well, I just thought I'll leave it at the backdrop first. Kurt, I think you're muted.
I forgot to mention that Shameem from 2013 to 2016 was a senior talent specialist in charge of group-wide talent management accountability. And now she's executive vice president and head of digital skills development at Malayan Bank Murhad. I didn't pronounce that right.
Maybank, yeah.
In this role, she is responsible for the development and implementation of the group's Future Ready program, which was the first digital mass upskilling program launched among financial institutions. She's recently done a webinar on empowering Malaysian women in a future-ready workforce, and currently working on conducting research on innovative methods to accelerate workforce learning and development in the United States as part of the U.S. State Department's Fulbright Research Program. So you're involved in empowerment issues for women, and you want to talk about any of that before others jump in here and ask
Sure.
questions, and talk a bit more about the programs that you've designed for skilling and upskilling the workforce there in Maybank?
Yeah. Now that I kind of set the stage for, why this is so important for the organization, then the question was, how do we get the workforce? Because we say that we've got thousands, right? Literally just our retail banking alone, we have about 20,000 employees out of the 40,000. So that's 50% of our workforce in the area that is under threat. Then the question is, uh, the speed in which we had to do this was also needed to be really accelerated because of the incoming changes and the threats, not just from Ant Financial, but also other organizations. In fact, Samsung was also coming up with new payment mechanisms for consumers. And there were also others as well in China. So the speed in which this had to be done was really important. And then the scalability now across all our employees. And so with the various demographic backgrounds, and then we looked at, how do we get people to literally rethink our business way in which we do business? Because now, starting at the top, our senior leaders, I have to say, it started with our senior leaders saying, I don't know what this thing called an algorithm is. I have to say that our senior leaders were very supportive in trying to understand what was happening. Potentially, sometimes, we have situations when leaders can see what's coming, but then we have this thing called the frog in a boiling water, right? Sometimes it just doesn't create the curiosity and the urgency to learn. So if you ask me, what is it that made our leaders be so open to learning and being so open to vulnerability in saying to everyone, hey, let's learn together? I'm not sure, but potentially it's a mixture of the urgency as well as the curiosity that innately that our leaders had. And then we kind of, created programs for our leaders to come in. But yeah, Chris, you have a question.
Well, sort of a comment and a question. I've seen this movie before, and so have the rest of us. I remember when desktop computing came into business over 40 years ago, when it moved out of hobbyist computing into business computing. And people were upset because they were buying all these machines and installing them, but productivity wasn't going up. And then they realized that this wasn't a more efficient way of doing business the old way. This was a more effective way of doing business in a new way. And they made that transition. I remember in the university I was employed at that time, when the university acquired desktop machines, and the first thing they did was to create a new category of secretary. They said, all of our secretaries who are really fast typists are going to become word processing secretaries, because this thing is going to get rid of the self-correcting typewriter. And so they can just type and make mistakes and catch up. The whole concept that people were going to be writing their own stuff never entered. And so I've always found it interesting when business people look at school districts and they say, I can't believe you bought all these machines, but you didn't spend any money on professional development. Because that's exactly what business does too. It seems to be the universal mistake. So in the National AI Institute that I'm part of as research director of research, we're all about upskilling and reskilling. It's a workforce AI Institute. And I see that you have AI in the title. And where does AI start to weave its way into this familiar story?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great reminder that we've been in this journey before. I think the first part of the upskilling and reskilling that we did was for our leaders, and thanks to Phil, actually, Phil Parker, who couldn't join us, was to create the realization, right? And also, actually, before I forget, there was another Harvard professor that we brought in for us to understand this technology. So, Chris, you're absolutely right. The first part of our journey was for us to try to figure out what is this technology, right? What is AI? What is an algorithm? And we brought in a professor, his name is Karim Lakhani from the Harvard Business School, because he actually demystified, or rather, he actually created the realization on what's new and what's different, or whether at all it is any different from the past. And to link that to how we make revenue and how we consume costs in the organization. And so I think the first part was really, we use a case study actually approach for our leaders to understand, okay, here is the ways in which AI, artificial intelligence, will change our business model. Number one, the fact that an AI actually is based on thousands of records, right? Of data, of effective decision making and less effective decision making. For example, because it's powered by a lot of data around who is more credit worthy and who is less credit worthy, that we could actually have less people making decisions on an arbitrary basis, and therefore we could optimize the revenue that we could actually collect, and from good quality borrowers, right? So, and do we need humans in the equation? Actually, no. We do not need humans to make decisions on loan applications anymore if we have those algorithms. And literally, the first project that we did was that we actually, the senior management, after understanding the power of algorithms and the fact that we could actually optimize revenue at speed and at scale, because once you have an algorithm, it could apply to across all the different parts, all the different geographies that we have, a single platform which could serve many people, right? And so the first project was literally building our own, we call it the digital financing solution for small, medium enterprises. So we built the algorithm. We went for training. Phil Parker, actually, he trained us on how you could do credit evaluation using large amounts of data, right? And model and optimize it. And now, the interesting thing which our senior management did was that typically for something new, a large corporation like Maybank could actually outsource this to a third party who has done it before. For example, we could have outsourced this to a consulting company, right? And consulting companies are at the forefront, right? They are learning, they have built models. And so the difference with what Maybank did was that we said, during our upskilling program with the leaders, they said, is this going to be our core competency? Meaning to say, are we going to use AI to actually incorporate AI into every aspect of how we make decisions, do business, and so forth? If it is going to be a core competency, just like finance and accounting, then we should actually be doing this ourselves. And so the first, I think the first win for us, to be honest, is that decision to build our products internally, all our algorithms. In fact, our CEO said, all our algorithms henceforth, now that we know what it is about, build it internally so that we have the core competency, we have the skills, we have the learnings internally, and not to outsource this to a third party. So in a corporation context, I think that was critical to us really pushing, therefore, the mandate to everyone that we should upskill and reskill. When it's top down, in a way, this was a top down decision, right? When it's top down, then everyone is part and parcel of this, irrespective of demographics, right? Women, there were women managers, right? Women credit managers, women bankers, right? They all had to upskill and reskill themselves because our CEO said that, AI and machine learning algorithms need to be part and parcel of how we rethink the way we do business. So Chris, to your point, right? That was exactly the difference that I think we did. We did not give people just the tool and say, let's do what we used to do in the new tool. No, we actually said, no, what is this tool about? And it's really different when we all have to change the way we do things. Yeah.
But that's got me a bit worried, your response. But Punya has a question first, and I'll jump in after Punya.
Sure. So first, a quick comment, and then I think I'll follow up with a question. So the comment is like, I'm so glad that you joined us, Shameem, because this is very different from a lot of the conversations that we have on Silver Lining, which tend to focus on K-12 context, which tend to focus on higher ed context or researchers and things that way. So what's interesting to me is that this is one case where actually the push for change is being driven by environmental changes, right? And then now, so the learning that has to happen within the organization. So it's in some ways you are sort of in the middle. You're both teaching up and down. You know what I mean? And so I would love to. So first of all, that's awesome that we are having a very different conversation, because I think that's important for us as academics to have a better understanding of this space as well. So that's great. But I would like to. You mentioned that you have a big workforce, who need to be upskilled. So what were some of the strategies that you used for that to happen? Was it like workshops that you were doing, or was it online courses or modules that they have to complete? Do you have some internal certification process? I mean, how do you go? How do you impart that knowledge? How do you impart the importance of doing it? And then how do you even know that those changes are happening? How do you evaluate? How do you assess learning or practices and so on? So it's a big question, but I'd love that part is, I think, what is most interesting for us as educators is how that actually played out in a large organization like the one you have.
Yes, I think, one of the key things besides trying to understand the technology from a business aspect now that we are clear, right, in terms of the implications to the business, then the question was, how do we get this done for all our staff? Number one, we really had to figure out, look, are we going to do this in a tactical manner or in a more strategic manner? Tactical manner meaning to say we could easily have sent people, let's learn about AI, data analytics, send people to statistics classes, send people to programming classes and things like that. And there are so many options out there. But what we thought about it, and this was us, and again, to your point, I had to facilitate the discussion with our senior leaders around the strategy in which we would actually upskill and reskill our staff. Now, thankfully, for me, again, the conversation around our senior leaders was that, well, if we look at what technology is and what technology is doing, this is a rapidly evolving area, right? The technology competency to, back in 2018, we didn't hear about large language models. We didn't hear about ChatGPT, we only heard probably about, algorithms, AI, supervised machine learning, that kind of stuff, right? And now, again, technology has evolved so rapidly that some of it is really changing the jobs that we do. And so we recognized back then that what we needed to do was to create two things. Number one, it was not just the skills that we're going after, but also the mindset, the learning mindset that our workforce needed to have. And so, and then I have to say, we also had to recognize now bringing in the emotional aspects here as well, right? That our workforce, if you talk about technology, At that time, Maybank had 9 different unions. We still have 8 different unions now. And whenever we speak about technology, the first thing that the unions have in mind is, can you guarantee us a job? How will digitalization impact jobs? And so upfront, so the approach that we had to take was not just skills development, but it was really change management, organizational development approach. And here, let me go back to the ISPI, International Society for Performance Improvement Standards, right? And also, the systems thinking, the systemic approach to change and organizational development, which was so important, because the first part was really addressing the emotional, how do I say, the emotional aspects that people had in their minds, which was fear of technology. So being learning technologies, right? If people are coming with fear, right, it's very difficult to teach them new skills. In fact, they would be resisting that. And so the first thing we had to do was to actually dispel or at least mitigate that fear in people. And thankfully for Maybank, because our role in Malaysia is not just a banking institution, but we are also a social, we have a huge national obligation and responsibility, being the largest bank and the largest publicly listed organization in Malaysia, that we protect the jobs of people as well. And so, in fact, our mission is humanizing financial services. And I'll talk a little bit more about what's coming for us. But in essence, so our senior leaders said, okay, let's have a whole change program, right? An organizational development approach. The first phase was really the phase of engagement, the phase of talking to people, the stage where we actually spoke to unions. I had union leaders in workshops, right? But the workshop wasn't about doing stuff. The workshop was about understanding and talking about the elephants in the room, putting the fish on the table, maybe you're familiar with all this, right? And really saying, look, let's have a conversation around what do you think technology will do to jobs. I called it out. Okay, so in fact, so I had to say, okay, here are the things, right, that is probably crossing your mind that we should talk about. So I was very clear in my engagement with the unions. And the fact that, so it was an education process, which was a different kind. It was about the emotional part, right, to embrace technology. So then, thankfully, in fact, so there was a series of workshops just on that. And then there was another workshop we did was on the growth mindset. So the way in which we did that was we brought in again the union leaders. And then we said, you know what? Okay, now that you seem to be a bit more open, right, to technology, let's talk about how do we actually make our members, union members, embrace this a bit more. And we had a workshop where we spoke about what growth mindset is and the fact that, intelligence is not fixed. That was very, very important. Abilities is not fixed, right? And then we got them, therefore, to list out, okay, positive indicators. What would you like to see in our employees, right, as indicators of growth mindsets, negative behaviors of non-growth mindsets, right, and things like that. And so that was the start, like the engagement of emotions, the engagement of buying in, right, of the process. Nothing to do with Coursera, nothing to do with Udemy and things like that. And so forth. Now I can expand a bit on the second phase, but maybe I'll stop here and get some questions and feedback.
No, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Let's wait for some follow-ups, and I think you can expand on that further.
All right.
Yeah.
Those are great questions. So I heard that you mentioned something really kind of interest to me, because in teaching and teacher education, we think a lot about how do we reskill or deskill teachers, and not being able to fire teachers, which I'm never advocate, because you mentioned about the unions talking about guarantee a job. And so, but it's actually sometimes impossible, right? And when you have the technology come in, you are transforming the entire industry. Like, for example, in China, it's when they went on cashless. I just got back from China, and that's definitely has has closed many bank branches on the streets. You don't have that, and that's a natural loss of staff, and you hire new staff to do different things. I'm sure AI is going to do that. So I was wondering, uh, how is your negotiation going with the unions? The unions have to accept that changes have to happen. It will affect. Actually, in China, recently, a big piece of news was that Baidu, many of you know, it's a big search engine, and that has deployed driverless taxis in several cities. And the taxi drivers were very unhappy about that. And people were debating how would that change. So I was wondering, Shameem, in your bank or in your industry, are people talking about them? There will be job losses. That's just, so how are we dealing with that?
Yeah, thanks. The thing about job losses, I was very clear with them, the unions, which was, number one, there is no way for us to guarantee jobs. That unless there's no, unless Maybank can control, global economies. It's not just the Malaysian economy we're talking about here. We operate not in silo. So it was very clear what we can and cannot promise. We cannot promise job. There's no such thing, because unless in fact when at that time the pandemic didn't come, but now they understand also, right? When the pandemic comes, people will not have, you can't really control anything, right? So now, with that being said, and I think the realization, it is true, they in fact getting the people to accept what the organization can guarantee and cannot guarantee, logically, I think they got it. That was step number one. Step number two, then the question is, what can we do as an organization to ensure? And this was the thing that I think, which was the approach, I think, which was quite important for Maybank, was the fact that while we cannot guarantee employment, what we can do is to give you skills that could make you employable in the case where we are no longer able to provide employment to employees. And so the point was that we are making you employable, not just for today, but for tomorrow. That was the approach. And so hence, the union had to take some time to figure out, they finally came to the conclusion where, okay, it's no point just doing nothing and waiting. So they said, okay, we might as well take this time to actually embrace learning, and hopefully we get skills that will make them employable, right? Because the skills that we were teaching them is skills that are in demand. A lot of it is still scarce, right? So in that manner, I think we got them to buy into the journey. Now it's an up and down, thing, because I cannot say that we have not. In fact, we have removed certain jobs within the bank. We have removed the jobs of the dispatch person, the person who takes and messengers, person who takes documents from one department to the next, simply because we have email now, and then loans are digitalized, right? So you don't need that group of people. We don't need the group of people to continuously to have, literally groups, huge groups of employees just to monitor all the suspicious transactions, right? That could indicate fraud and things like that. Because now all of that is actually done by algorithms. And so there are jobs that have changed. And so what we do is that in Maybank, we have 4 pillars, 4 options for staff. Number 1, upskill and reskill. Number 2, some people may not actually want to work in the bank full time. They actually want to do other things besides working in the bank. Now, the reason is because people have joined Maybank for job security in the past. And now that some people actually are more affluent, more well-to-do, they may not want to work in a job. full-time. So we provide people employment opportunities where they work the bank half-time and then they can do other things on another separate time, right? So flexible work arrangements. Number 3, sabbatical. Now, in Maybank, in fact, I am a recipient of that sabbatical. In Maybank, we said, instead of allowing people, right, to just stay with the bank and reskill and upskill, right, allow people to explore other job opportunities outside the bank. So Maybank sabbatical policy is very unique because when you're on a sabbatical, while you don't receive any salary, you can get employment provided it's not in conflict with it's not a competitor of the bank and things like that. So if you wanted to actually start up a business during sabbatical, you could see for 1 year, 2 years, up to 2 years, right? You could try that out. And then and if it doesn't work out, you could still come back to the bank, right? So that's our unique sabbatical option. The 4th option, therefore, is you actually, once you start, let's say I'm going with the same example of the entrepreneur. Now, after 1 year of sabbatical, you did the entrepreneurial thing, you actually figure out that you could make it work. The 4th option is that we will then, therefore, depending on your years of service, give you full salary for 6 months up to 12 months for you to then try out your entrepreneurial thing. But after 6 months or 12 months, then you would then leave the bank. Okay, so these are the different options that we've created for people, not just upskilling and reskilling, because people may not want to be part of the bank in this environment. Actually, some people may not. So yeah, those are the different things. I see a question.
So Chris has a comment before I ask a question. Chris?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to observe that part of the problem here is an education system that, for example, in college, has people declare a major and prepares them with a very narrow set of non-transferable skills for their first job in that major. And then in a disruptive world, the job changes, the skills changes, maybe the career disappears and a new career appears, and they're back where they were when they graduated from high school. There isn't a balance between career-specific skills and career independent skills that really should be part of the curriculum. But it's a situation in which the university thinks about itself rather than thinking about its students, because if you're a faculty member in engineering, what you want to make sure is that every student who declares engineering takes nothing but engineering courses so that they're in your course, and so you can hire more engineering faculty.
So Shameem, this has been an interesting conversation, and I have 2 questions. I'll ask one now, and then I'll let Lydia ask something after me, and then I have another follow-up, we'll let it evolve. But you've kind of already answered my first question, because I was just concerned about all those people, those 20,000 or 10,000 of the 20,000 who lost their jobs or could potentially lose their positions. And I wonder what they were saying at the time, what was going on in their minds. That's their worst fear, right? When these significant technological changes occur and everyone thinks about being displaced, or how they're going to survive this rough environment. But you've talked about the types of training, the types of options that are available to them just there at Maybank, and maybe other institutions, organizations, fintech services have adopted similar things. I mean, so I've kind of a question changed. Have you seen people adopt the strategies that Maybank has adopted in their institutions? Have you heard from people who said, wow, this is really interesting. You've come up with a possible solutions that may work for us or may not, and we've come up with these options, because this is a global issue, not as you said, it's not specific to one region, one country, one institution or organization. But I have that as a question, but I also have a question of, can you give us a day in the life or a month in the life or a year in the life of a person who's going through these changes? What kinds of things have you heard from employees, or have you seen employees go through to help them to, not just survive, but to thrive in these technologically intensive environments. So, what have you heard from others, and what have you heard right inside? What from the people, from the staff, from the employees that you are in charge of, or you at least were in charge of talent development, and probably still are, and more so as you moved up the ladder there. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I think, the flexible work arrangements, that has helped. I think that I've seen organizations do that quite a bit. No, flexible, I would say not work maybe I should say flexible work contracts, because rather than just a full-time contract that we do, we also, what I mean there is that we can actually change the time allocation, right? That employees have to spend in the organization doing our job. So a flexible contract allows people, in fact, it's in line with the gig economy, where if you wanted to work 5 hours a day rather than 8 hours, you could do that, or you wanted to work 2 hours rather than 8 hours, you could also do that, right? So I think that has actually kicked off quite well. I mean, organizations are doing that to cater to different work interests and careers. I think the other thing, of course, reskilling, upskilling, many organizations do that. I think the difference, which I would love to see more, is that people are not just sending people to programs and classes, and to Chris' point, to whatever the university is focusing on, but rather what makes reskilling work, at least in the context of Maybank that we've seen, is the fact that it is embedded within the job. So what happens usually is that when we send people for training, when they come back, there's a huge transfer of learning drop-off rate, right? So maybe about 20% of people, would successfully apply the skills to the job, but many people have difficulty actually applying the skills after the classroom or after the e-learning or whatsoever. So what we did was literally, number one, starting with the job has to change. To Chris's point earlier, right? The job cannot continue to be a typist. No, the job has to be recommendations on what you're typing, perhaps, right? And so when we change, or when we explain to the staff, this is the job previously, this is the job now, and here are the skills to excel in delivering to this new job, then it works out better, because then people get rewarded based on it, if it's part and parcel of the job. For example, if the job, one of the KPIs, key performance indicator, right, is to produce recommendations rather than how fast you can type, well, then the upskilling and reskilling towards producing better recommendations work, right? And if you can use algorithms to do that, people will be happy. And so I think the nature of the job has to change first. People can. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't go for learning on their own about what algorithms are. No, not a problem. I think the awareness, I think what we did was to create options for people to go for Udemy programs, Coursera programs and things like that. They could volunteer to reskill themselves on their own, not a problem. But what made the learning stick was when we actually changed the nature of the job, right? Because the rewards, KPIs were changing. And number two, one key thing which had to happen was the support of the line managers. And so the sequence in which we did the upskilling and reskilling was very important. We did have to start with the top, because the problem was, if we started with the bottom, right, then the people were trying to actually apply. In fact, we saw this. Now, I'm not saying we did it perfectly. On hindsight, we did also, in some cases, start with the bottom. And when we did that, we found that the staff, the employees, had difficulty, trying to put their learnings on the job, because the managers were still thinking in the old way. And so when we did it, though, in top-down fashion, right, where there was a systematic effort of the leaders learning about it, now understanding it enough, and when we then put the staff below them through the program, the learning worked better, the learning sticks better. And so I think this is where reskilling and upskilling is not just about, the ADDIE model. It's really the whole, environmental change that you needed to coordinate as well. So that's on the reskilling portion and what I've seen organizations do and what I think we need to focus on better. Secondly, how do employees feel about this? Well, the employees who have upskill and reskill themselves are now highly sought after. In fact, because now I'm also responsible for all of HR for technology, our technology division and data divisions and digital banking. I've seen staff who we have upskill and reskill getting salary offers, huge salary offers. For example, this area on generative AI and AI machine learning, people who actually have done, just by stating that they have done, machine learning implementations on their jobs, they are getting job offers. I'm literally now having the other way around where I have to retain our staff, right? So, and I think that is a good problem to have. But at the same time, there's a new problem being created, which is scarcity of skills. So my goal is to Kurt, to your point, we need more organizations, right, upskilling and reskilling, because again, if Maybank is doing all this, we will lose our talent still because of the scarcity in demand, talent demand, right? So I'm trying to do this at an industry level. So the banking industry in Malaysia has come together. In fact, we created our future skills framework. And now with that framework, we are actually implementing it in the various institutions across Malaysia. So yeah, does that answer a bit about what you asked?
Yeah, but I still want to see a person and hear from them. And do you have any reports that where you've documented any case studies of employees and put them and made them available for free as OER? I'm just, maybe there's a report for you do research. I know you do research.
Yeah.
And are interested in research. And by the way, listeners who are fascinated with this program, who would like to do more, I put Shameem's email in the blog post, and she'd love to do research with people around the world. I know this because we've talked about it in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So we document, by the way, because we are a public listed organization, we document all, in fact, any data that we report is auditable and by external auditors and internal auditors. So in our annual report, every year since 2018, we actually have been reporting on the progress of our program called the Future Ready program. So under the Future Ready program, we've reported number of people who have gone through the upskilling program, but also the results, the impact, the business impact that they've been able to create, the level 4 and level 3 kind of evaluations, right? And it's for us, because it's part and parcel of the job, it's easier to report on level 4 because the KPIs are there. And but what we had to do was create new metrics, leading indicators, so that we can have at least the chain, right? The flow from input in terms of the skills to some leading indicators in terms of what are the behavioral changes that we would expect to see, and then to the outcomes that we see. And so that is being reported in our annual report every year in terms of the numbers. Some programs we created were new actually. Some programs actually, for example, our digital marketing and social media marketing programs, that was something that was new, which literally enable our sales staff to sell on the digital, space. So our sales staff no longer sell face to face, but they actually sell through digital means. Through social media and so forth. So that's again reported, and the KPIs are well established there.
Let me interrupt here and yeah, sure. And I'll just point out level 4 gets into impact and return on investment for people who aren't in this field and are listening in or watching the show. Lydia, would you like to ask a question? And I'll have a follow-up after you, and maybe someone else has a question as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Kurt. First, I want to say I really appreciate the very human and multifaceted approach Maybank has taken, not just to protect people's jobs, but to protect their employability fundamentally. And I would love to hear more about these like learning programs that you've mentioned, that you mentioned these in-house training that you've developed. Also, you mentioned sending people to take different classes. You mentioned some digital online classes. I just want to piece all these together to get a picture of how learning really took place at Maybank.
One of the things which Phil Parker helped us do, which unfortunately he's not here, but we found that, we wanted to put people to machine learning, how to develop algorithms and things like that. So we had a program which taught people about how it's relevant to business and then how they can do it on their jobs. Now, we found, again, we didn't get it right the first time, but we found through the journey that the ability for non-technical staff who have zero programming background to learn programming, it was just so difficult. The learning curve was just so steep, right? So what we did was, okay, I asked Phil, actually, hey, Phil, everyone uses Microsoft Excel, right? Isn't there a way for us to actually use macros, right? Where they can just click on buttons and then create and implement these machine learning algorithms within Excel? Because I do know that some algorithms do run in Excel. And then he thought about it and he said, okay, let's think about this, right? Do many people have this problem, right, where they cannot learn programming? And indeed, a lot of people do, right? It's a cryptic, highly technical, highly procedural, right? It is very, very difficult for a lot of people. And so what we did was, again, I think perhaps this was the part where we use tools, right? Learning tools to enable learning. So the learning tool that we developed was, we called it the Maybank Excel AI tool, the Meet, where it is an Excel-based program. People could actually click on buttons to implement all sorts of machine learning algorithms or statistical algorithms. They could implement naive Bayes, they could implement a logistic regression, they could implement ETS, ARIMA, forecasting models within Excel itself. And then they could see the results, and the results were explainable within that. And so what that did was that it eliminated the nitty-gritties that you actually, like programming, which you actually now, thanks to, again, ChatGPT, it's a low-code and no-code environment, right? And programmers are, again, now under, fire, maybe they might lose their jobs too. But the point is that focusing on the value of the task rather than, and seeing what is the value of the task and not the specific nitty-gritties. And maybe those nitty-gritties can be automated out. And so that's literally what we did. We created, a bridge, right? And so that enabled a lot of people to now understand why machine learning is so powerful, how it can relate to their data, and how they can actually implement it on their job. So that tool was very important. So that's the machine learning program. Other programs we did was, we taught people, well, now that you have the data, now that, how do you actually tell a story? So we have a program called the data story program, right? Data storytelling program, where we teach people how, to create recommendations, how they can relate data to business decision making. And so again, frameworks were established to help people come up with recommendations. And again, I think the point was trying to codify a bit, or trying to find what makes a great recommendation, and then, reverse engineering it into a framework that works. We do that again also for sales. Now, Maybank, you're right. Our mission is humanizing financial services. Some of our training programs had nothing to do with tech, but it was for our sales staff to be advisors. Because the question is, how do you humanize in a digital world? And we found that when we talk to our customers, especially, in fact, many different segments, they still want to talk to a human about money issues. And so we taught our staff how to be an advisor versus a salesperson. And so we went into the areas of advisory. In fact, we had to teach our sales staff about business. Okay, here's how businesses make money, right? And so if you're an entrepreneur, you will want to know how you can raise capital, right? How you can actually manage your cash flow better. And so when you go into a conversation, have conversations around, hey, do you need more cash to expand, or do you need abilities for you to manage your financials better, right? So it's more of an engagement process rather than a sales, product pushing process. So we also had to change that. And we found that our customers were actually more open to us and more receptive to us. And so, and this is something that I think Maybank is doing differently than other banks, because we realized that there is still a role of the human in there, which can also enable us to sell more. And it has nothing to do with technology. It's just about the mindset, right? And the positioning of the people and the humans to continue that human connection in a digital world. In fact, I think that could be easily our niche area.
So
Yeah.
Shameem, we only have a couple minutes left, believe it or not. This has gone by fast, this hour has. And I do want to get to one other topic, at least briefly, and that's the topic you've been leading the charge on, and that's the empowerment of women in Malaysia.
Oh, yes.
And so if AI hadn't happened, you'd still probably have that initiative. But now that AI has emerged on the scene, it's probably, added a layer of complexity to what you're doing in terms of empowering women in Malaysia. So we have technological changes, we have cultural changes overlapping one another. Do you want to talk about that charge that you have, that mission that you have, and how this is parallel to the changes that are happening in terms of digitalization and upskilling and reskilling the workforce? I know we only
Yes.
in 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
Yeah. So our approach was inclusivity. Number one, because digitalization was going to hit everyone, a lot of the jobs, because we saw it again from a systemic perspective, technology's implication to various jobs, various functions and things like that. And so again, I think the same thing in education, right? No one needs or no one is left behind. And so with that approach, we saw, of course, there was an underrepresentation of women in tech. In fact, right now in Maybank, number of women in tech is about 36%. That is actually still higher than many global standards. However, our demographics is such that we have actually slightly more women than men in the workplace. And so how do we actually then narrow the gap in terms of representation of women in tech? Because technology is an in-demand scarce skill. And so what we did was we started to, number one, demystify what technology is. So again, going back to the same approach of linking technology into different jobs of the bank. Because, for example, in HR, we actually have the reverse, where we have more women than men in HR. And so in functions like mine, all functions in the bank required the implementation of technology and AI, right? So we upskill different functions, we upskill different people, and we got women coaches because this was technical. Let's say we take machine learning, because it's a technical area and a lot of coders are men. So those people who were women, who we managed to successfully upskill, we got them to be coaches for actually subsequent cohorts. So when people came to the learning coaching session, they would see all women there, right? So it was a way in which to demystify or to change the lens that this is a technical, male-dominated thing. So women coaches, and then we celebrated successes. We got many women who, upskill, we featured them. Communication. So in our employee communications, when someone creates a good business impact, we actually we send it out, blast that communication out so that they can see that women are embracing this. It includes women managers too. Some of our products that we have are led by women, our digital SME product. And because in fact, she was one of the first few women who actually had to reskill herself and get her whole team reskilled. So featured her as well a lot. So yeah, it was about a lot of making it inclusive, narrowing down the barriers to learning, like with the new tools, and then making sure that we change the what people see visually, right? Who are the tech people? We changed a bit. We tried to change that. Our communications, tried to feature women and so forth. So yeah, and of course there were also other supporting mechanisms like in the workplace. We provided now trying to get more women in tech is not easy because tech is demanding, because it has that 24/7 kind of, our operations runs 24/7, and so the timing sometimes does not work for women because they have family obligations. So what we did was we actually introduced a lot of flexible flexible time arrangements, so that while they could not work during certain times, they could work on other times. So made those kind of work arrangements possible. So yeah, in a summary, that was pretty much what we did.
We could probably go another hour just on that topic, but this hour has gone by extremely fast. I mean, I must say, all my colleagues had excellent questions for you. You've given us some depth and some additional layers beyond what's in the blog post. I recommend people read the blog post, contact Shameem. Young, Punya, or Chris, or Lydia, any final comment here?
No, thank you so much.
The hour just blew by. I can't believe it's past the hour by 2 minutes.
It did
Thank
blow
you
by.
so much.
Yeah, and say thank you to Phil as well. Next week's show is going to be very similar. It's also at 8 p.m. on September 7th. And it's also about digitization and how it's impacting the workforce. But in just a little ways away from Malaysia, at the Open University of China. And 5 million people enrolled in the Open University of China. So we'll hear about open education at scale, stories from the Open U of China with Dr. Chi Li, my former advisee, and Li Wei will join us next week. I hope you all can be there or watch the recording. Thank you.